The letter James Garner never meant the world to see. Sometimes the truest words are the ones we save for the very end. James Garner spent more than 5 decades being Hollywood's most reliable leading man. The guy who always showed up. The actor who made charm look effortless and heroism feel real. But when his life was winding down and the cameras had finally stopped rolling, he picked up a pen and wrote something nobody expected. A letter to Doris Day. Not a goodbye filled with nostalgia. Not a love letter or a thank you note. It was a confession. Raw, honest, and stripped of every bit of polish Hollywood had taught him to wear. What he revealed wasn't scandalous. It was something far more devastating. It was the truth about what it cost him to be the man everyone loved. James Garner came into this world on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma. He was born James Scott Bumgarner, and his early years were anything but easy. When he was only 5 years old, his mother died. That kind of loss changes a child forever. His father remarried, but the relationship with his new stepmother was difficult, sometimes harsh, sometimes cruel. He learned early that the world wasn't going to take care of him. He'd have to take care of himself. Those hard years carved deep grooves into his character. They gave him empathy. They gave him emotional depth. And they gave him the ability to understand pain in a way that would later make every performance he gave feel achingly real. Before Hollywood ever noticed him, James Garner lived a dozen different lives. He worked blue-collar jobs that broke his back and built his resilience. He played football for a while, dreaming of a future that never quite materialized. Then he served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. He was wounded twice, earned the Purple Heart, saw things that stayed with him long after the fighting stopped. Those experiences didn't just toughen him up, they grounded him. They gave him a deep distrust of pretension and a profound respect for ordinary people trying to get by. And when he finally stepped in front of a camera, audiences felt that authenticity immediately. There was something real about him, something trustworthy. Garner's journey to stardom wasn't planned. He stumbled into acting almost by accident in the early 50s. He studied briefly at a well-known acting studio in New York, but he never tried to become a movie star in the traditional sense. He didn't adopt the exaggerated mannerisms or the inflated personas that so many of his peers relied on. Instead, he developed a style that felt completely natural, underplayed, conversational, honest. At the time, that approach was revolutionary, and it paid off in a big way. In 1957, he was cast as Brett Maverick in the television western Maverick. The role turned him into a household name overnight. As the charming, witty, slightly reluctant gunslinger, he subverted everything people expected from westerns. He brought humor and irony to a genre that had always been dominated by stoic, tight-lipped heroes. Maverick didn't just make Garner famous. It established the blueprint for the rest of his career. Over and over again, he played men who were smart instead of flashy. Moral without being preachy. Strong without needing to prove it. Whether he was playing a private detective, a soldier, a romantic lead, or an aging cowboy, Garner always conveyed quiet decency and understated strength. His transition from television to film was seamless. In movies like The Great Escape in 1963, the Americanization of Emily in 1964, Grand Prix in 1966, and Support Your Local Sheriff in 1969, he showed incredible range. He could handle drama, comedy, and action with equal ease. But what really set him apart wasn't just his talent. It was his integrity. One of Garner's defining traits was his refusal to be pushed around by the studio system. At a time when actors had almost no power, he took on major studios in court over unfair contracts, and he won. His legal battles made him a quiet pioneer for performers' rights. He earned respect throughout the industry, not just for his work, but for his willingness to stand up for what was right. Garner never set out to be an activist, but his willingness to fight for fairness reflected the same integrity that shaped every other part of his life. In 1974, Garner made a triumphant return to television with The Rockford Files. He created one of the most iconic characters in TV history. Jim Rockford, the private investigator who was always broke, always bruised, always emotionally guarded, but somehow endlessly likable. Garner poured humor, vulnerability, and humanity into that role. He won an Emmy. He cemented his legacy as a master of both the big screen and the small one. The show's influence endured for decades, shaping countless crime dramas that came after. Even as he got older, Garner's star never faded. He embraced mature roles with grace. He delivered deeply moving performances in films like Murphy's Romance in 1985, which earned him an Academy Award nomination, and Space Cowboys in 2000. But perhaps his most poignant role came in 2004 when he played the older Noah Calhoun in The Notebook. It was a tender, dignified portrayal of enduring love that introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans. Young people who had never seen Maverick or the Rockford Files fell in love with him all over again. But behind all the success, behind the accolades and the awards, there was a love story, the real one. And it was as unconventional and enduring as the man himself. James Garner was married only once, to Lois Josephine Fleischman Clark, a woman who became not just his wife, but the steady emotional anchor of his life for nearly 6 decades. They met at a party in 1956. What happened next was a whirlwind. In an era when celebrities dated for years before making any kind of commitment, Garner trusted his gut completely. Just 16 days after they met, on August 17, 1956, James Garner and Lois Clark were married. The decision raised eyebrows, but it turned out to be one of the most enduring unions in Hollywood history. Garner later talked about that headlong rush into love with his trademark humor and honesty. "We went to dinner every night for 14 nights, he once said. "I was just absolutely nuts about her." Their honeymoon was modest by any standard. Garner famously joked that he spent just $77 on the whole trip and that it nearly broke him. But that frugality, paired with genuine affection and deep respect, set the tone for their entire marriage. Fame and wealth and Hollywood excess never defined their relationship. Commitment did. Garner often spoke about marriage with a mix of wit and hard-earned wisdom. He once compared it to military service, saying, "Marriage is like the army. Everyone complains, but you'd be surprised at the large number of people who re-enlist." Behind the joke was a deeper truth. Garner understood that long marriages aren't built on perfection. They're built on perseverance. When they married, Lois brought with her a young daughter from a previous marriage. Her 9-year-old child was recovering from polio, a devastating illness in the 50s. Garner didn't hesitate. He stepped into the role of a devoted father figure, embracing both Lois and her daughter as his own family. That early act of compassion and responsibility spoke volumes about who he really was. His private life reflected the same integrity that audiences saw on screen. In 1958, James and Lois welcomed their only child together, a daughter named Greta, born on January 4th. She was affectionately nicknamed Gigi, and she became the center of their world. Despite Garner's demanding career and constant travel, he remained deeply devoted to his role as a husband and father. He often chose family over professional opportunities when he had to make that choice. If this story about James Garner touches your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. While Hollywood marriages famously crumble under pressure, the Garners worked quietly to protect their home life from the glare of fame. But their marriage wasn't without challenges. Over the years, James and Lois experienced 2 periods of separation. One lasted 3 months in 1970. Another began in 1979. Unlike so many celebrity splits that end in permanent estrangement, these separations ultimately revealed the depth of their bond rather than its weakness. After time apart and careful reflection, the couple reunited in September 1981. They chose to recommit to one another. Their reconciliation wasn't a dramatic public spectacle. It was a private decision rooted in love, loyalty, and shared history. Remarkably, James Garner and Lois Clark remained married until his death in 2014. In an industry notorious for fleeting romances and broken vows, their nearly 58-year marriage stood as a quiet testament to endurance, forgiveness, and genuine partnership. But as the years wore on, life began to take its toll. James Garner's later years were marked not only by his enduring fame, but by a long and often painful battle with serious health challenges. During the grueling production of The Rockford Files in the 70s, a show that demanded constant physical work and frequent stunts, Garner's knees began to deteriorate. What started as simple wear and tear became a chronic, debilitating problem. Over the course of that decade, he endured 6 or 7 knee surgeries. He kept returning to work despite the pain and limited mobility. The damage was so extensive that in 2000, he had to undergo full knee replacement surgery on both knees. His body had sacrificed everything in service to his craft. His struggles weren't limited to his knees. On April 22, 1988, Garner faced a life-threatening cardiac crisis. He underwent quintuple bypass heart surgery. The procedure was serious, sobering. Yet those close to him were amazed at how quickly he bounced back. Doctors strongly urged him to quit smoking, a habit he'd carried most of his life. Quitting proved difficult, but Garner eventually succeeded in 2005. His daughter later reflected on just how deeply ingrained the habit had been. He'd been smoking since he was 12 years old. The fact that he finally quit made the achievement all the more remarkable. In May 2008, Garner suffered another major setback. He had a stroke. 2 days later, on May 11th, he underwent surgery. Despite the seriousness of the event, his doctors reported that his prognosis was very positive. Fans who had followed his career for decades held on to hope. But the stroke marked a turning point. His health never fully returned to what it had been. It was during these final years, as his body began to fail him, that James Garner sat down and wrote that letter. The one to Doris Day. His longtime friend. His co-star from two beloved romantic comedies in the 60s. The woman who, like him, had spent decades smiling for cameras while carrying private burdens that nobody else understood. "I never said enough when it mattered," Garner admitted in the letter. "We spent our lives smiling for cameras, being brave for everyone else, but rarely honest about the weight we carried." His words weren't dramatic. They were plain spoken. Just like him, Garner had always resisted the trappings of celebrity. He often called himself an accidental movie star. In the letter, he confessed that his easygoing image had been a shield. "People thought I was relaxed, unbothered," he wrote. "Truth is, I worried all the time. About work. About money. About whether I deserved any of it." To Doris Day, who had endured her own private heartbreaks behind a sunny public persona, Garner spoke with rare vulnerability. "You understood better than anyone how lonely it can be to be adored," he confessed. He reflected on how Hollywood demanded perfection while offering very little grace in return. Contracts were ruthless. Studios were controlling. And the pressure to remain likable never faded. "I fought them when I could," he wrote, referencing his famous legal battles. "But even when I won, I felt tired. Fighting shouldn't have to be the price of dignity." Garner also confronted his regrets. He spoke about missed roles, strained relationships, the emotional cost of always being the good guy. "I wish I'd been softer with myself," he admitted. "I wish I hadn't mistaken endurance for strength." The letter acknowledged the toll that injuries and chronic pain had taken on his spirit. "There were days I smiled through pain so bad it scared me," he wrote. "I didn't want to disappoint anyone. Fans, producers, even strangers." Most poignantly, Garner wrote about friendship. His bond with Doris Day represented something rare in Hollywood. Trust without expectation. "You never asked me to be anything other than Jim," he wrote. "No charm. No lines. No act." He thanked her for showing him that kindness could survive fame. "You proved that decency wasn't a weakness in this business. It was an act of rebellion." As the letter neared its end, Garner turned reflective, even tender. "If this is the last thing I leave behind," he wrote, "I want it to be the truth." He spoke of gratitude for his wife, his family, and the fans who stayed with him across the decades. But he refused to romanticize his life. "It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. But I tried to be fair. And I tried to be real." His final words to Doris Day were simple, but devastating in their clarity. "If I've learned anything," Garner wrote, "it's that being kind lasts longer than being famous. We outlived the noise, Doris. Maybe that was the point all along."